Hello, I'm Kristy Wallace, and this is Suddenly I See, a podcast which explores the power of a positive mindset, gratitude, and love in changing your life for the better. Join me as I share the mind hacks, rituals, and choices that have helped me survive and thrive in the face of adversity to arrive at a point where suddenly I see what truly matters in this life. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to a little bonus episode that I'm calling Grief Anniversary. Doesn't that sound fun? It really wasn't, but it's something that happened for me a couple of weeks ago, and upon sharing it with a friend, she's like, you need to podcast this. And I thought, yeah, you know what, I keep thinking about it and I think it can be of benefit to others, so let's go there. And so here is our little bonus episode because of that. So a couple of weeks ago now, I hit my tricky weekend, which is basically, and it happens every year, but it hasn't really been a challenge until now, which is the fact that, my dad passed away the day before Paddy turned 1. And so that means every year when it's Paddy's birthday, it's also the anniversary of my dad's passing. And usually that's really not a problem for me. That comes from the fact that I've chosen to pretty much ignore that date in the past. Is that healthy? I don't know. But that's how I've operated with it because I feel like I need to be high for Paddy's birthday because that's such a celebration. And I really don't want to focus on the negative, which is the fact that my dad passed away. I choose instead to celebrate my dad every day of the year and think of, the memories I've made with him, the legacy he's left, and not focus everything onto that one really sad day when he, was no longer with us. And that conscious choice, I guess, has got me so far down the track. But this year was 9 years since my dad passed away. So for whatever reason, my body and my brain decided that this was the year that it needed to bring up everything that I hadn't processed yet. And it took me by surprise because, to be fair, last year on the date of Dad's anniversary passing, I was in Canberra actually with Audrey, and my brother had sent me this message saying, thinking of you guys today. And I genuinely flipped out because I was like, oh my God, why? What happened? Like, has something, and because I wasn't at home, I was like, has something happened to someone back at home and no one's told me yet because I'm down in Canberra? And so I had this little kind of mental freak out. And then when I did the math and worked out what date it was, I was like, oh, it's the anniversary of Dad's passing. Shit, that's why he sent me that message. And so that's actually where I was. Like, I really genuinely just ignored that date quite a lot. The other thing that coincided this year was the fact that it was 9 years since Dad had passed away, and then the next day Paddy was turning 10. And for me, that was just too big a milestone, and everything about that weekend just sat really heavily with me. So when I got up on the morning of Dad's passing this year, it really, for whatever reason, swept me back to the day that Dad died and the morning of that, finding out when Mum turned up early that morning that he'd passed away. And it nearly, in a way, made me like relive that day. And I realized how much during the original day that he passed away, I was in 100% survival mode. So, like I've mentioned earlier in the podcast, we had Paddy on treatment at the time still. So we're trying to run to chemotherapy. It was his birthday the next day. We had a party happening a little bit later as well that week. I wanted to support Mum and help her to organise Dad's funeral. And we didn't want to be doing that on Paddy's birthday. And so I very much went straight into survival mode and caseworker mode on the day of his passing. And I realised this year that I didn't actually feel any emotions. Like, I don't remember really crying that day because it was just like, you've got to get things done. You've got to get on to the next thing that you need to do to get through this. And so my body, for whatever reason, chose this year to bring everything up that I hadn't dealt with 9 years ago. And it just felt like this overwhelming sadness. And the best analogy I could think of at the time was, if you imagine, those like heavy woolen blankets that all the mums used to have back in the 80s and 90s on beds. It was like if you wet one of those, chucked it over your shoulders and said, off you go. And you tried to walk through your weekend and go about your day wearing the thickest, heaviest wet blanket you could find. It's genuinely how my body felt. I was heavy. I was lethargic. I just felt really upset and emotional. And I spent most of the day, it was actually Audrey's soccer day. So she was playing around lunchtime. We had to drive over an hour to get to the soccer field. And when I hopped in the car, it's like my body was like, all right, we've got some quiet time and space here. Let's give it to her. And it was this huge wave of grief just kind of came over me. And I just kept wanting to cry and did cry. So tears would just keep streaming down my face. And I ended up getting, halfway into the trip and just saying to Audrey, look, I'm really sorry. I just need you to know you've not done anything wrong. I'm just upset today because it's the anniversary. 9 years ago, this is the day I woke up and my dad wasn't in the world anymore. And for whatever reason, today is the day I'm going to feel all the feelings about that. And she was like, that's okay. I'm all right with that. And I thought, what an amazing answer. And so I just continued driving, blubbering. Obviously, you could still see the road. It wasn't too messy, but it was just this constant stream of tears and just sadness that I didn't. And what actually made me sadder was that I didn't get to feel those feelings on the day, like that I'd had to wait 9 years to finally get to a point where I felt safe enough to process all the sadness that came with Dad's passing. But I'm so glad that I did. I didn't try and stop crying, push it down. I was like, you've just got to let this out and you've just got to feel what you can. So I'm grateful that Audrey gifted me that space to be able to do it. And then I got to the soccer field and took a few deep breaths and tidied myself up a little bit and was like, okay, you can do soccer. Let's go. And then, getting out and about, fresh air, talking to friends at the soccer was a great way to flip me around. And well, I'd had that moment to process. I was now able to still function throughout the rest of the day, which was really nice as well. What this made me think of, though, too, is funny how, serendipity I've spoken about before, how things just happen at the right time. Just the week or two prior to this anniversary, I'd done a youth mental health first aid course, and it was like a refresher. I've done it before in the past. And the facilitator we had this time was talking about the fact that when young children experience grief, so say the loss of a grandparent, they often don't process it at the time because they're looking at their parents and they can see their parents aren't okay. And so they push things down, and then you'll have little kids years later that are in, hysterical tears, and you think, what's happened to this child? And they then can express that they're sad that, grandpa's passed away. And you think, but that happened years ago. But it's taken them to this point to suss out the room and feel like, okay, I think everyone's ready to cope with me having this moment. Which one fascinated me because I thought how incredible are little kids at reading the room and the adults around them. But then I knew kind of instantly when I was going through this emotion on the day that I think this is what had happened to me. And though, even though I wasn't a child by any means, in this scenario, I was a child because I needed to be there to support my mum. And I was really worried about how she was going to cope with losing her husband. Like, that's everything. And so, like I say, I went into caseworker mode on that day instead to try and support her. And I feel like it's only now, so many years down the track, that my body and my mind got to a space where it felt safe to process all those emotions that I couldn't feel on the day of his actual passing. So that was incredibly enlightening. It helped me get through the day because I realized what was happening to me, but it was still a really heavy and a really challenging day. So the other thing that I did differently this time, I grew up in the school of get over it, and I know now that we can't just get over these things. So I gifted myself a quiet afternoon when we got back from soccer. I was like, I'm not doing anything extreme. I'm just laying around. If I need that time to recharge, I'm doing that. And that night I took a bath for an hour or so and just, thought all the thoughts I needed to, let the feelings out, had another good cry. And then I was like, I need to just sit and journal this to officially close that chapter for me on what was coming up and why and how I was feeling. So that was good. And then it was late at night and time for bed, and Fred came to check in too and was like, is everything okay? And I just said, no, it's not. Like, it's just a really heavy day. And he'd actually been there in the morning. I'd gone over that morning to see Mum and give her a hug and some flowers and see how she was going. And we both just started blubbering then. So I knew it was going to be a big day. And Fred popped his head in because he'd come to see Mum, not knowing I was there, and just check how she was going. And he walked into both of us just blubbering messes. And to his credit, like that, a lesser man would have turned and walked away. But Fred turned up and walked in and was like, oh, who needs a hug? And just came and gave us hugs. And there was no judgment from him, and he's so good at doing that all throughout, our marriage. He's just been the rock that stands beside me, especially when I'm in really challenging, mental health spaces and emotional spaces. He just holds space and gives hugs and says, "I'm here if you need me." And so, that night was exactly the same, where he's like, I'm here for you, and gave me a hug. And I said, I think the other thing getting to me is that Paddy's 10 tomorrow. How is Paddy 10 tomorrow? And, I know everyone always, the cliche is, oh, time flies and how did we get here? And, but for me, it was actually a really deep feeling of, oh my gosh, look at what we've, been through to get here. And so I thought, here comes the next wave, and I'll deal with that tomorrow. So I was actually able to sleep quite well, I think, because I'd journaled a lot of dad stuff and felt I'd close that chapter for the day. And then the next morning was Paddy's 10th birthday. So we celebrated with him, and he actually had been invited to a little friend's party. So I thought, I don't really have the time today to feel all the emotions that I need for this milestone, but I knew I had Monday where I was free and had time to myself. So I had mentally just blocked that you can process all of this on Monday, just again, get through today. So we had a beautiful day together, and I felt really privileged that I got to go with him to this little friend's party so I could support him. It was like a cool little paint and sip for a girl in his class, and to be beside him on his birthday and with his friends was a really special moment for me. So I was grateful for that. And that afternoon, I just had a nap because I could tell I was still walking around with my wet blanket on that was weighing me down in life. And I just, took care of myself for once. I didn't beat myself up for thinking, why are you so emotional? How are you reacting like this? You've got to push it down. I actually this year had no judgment on myself for whatever came up. And I'm sharing that because I'm really proud of it, actually. And it's not the way I would have treated myself in the past. So I think that shows that being more aware of the feelings and emotions that I have and choosing not to judge them has been a big part of my healing. And to get to that point now felt really quite positive in a way too. So while it was hard, I could see, how far I'd come to. And so on the Monday, it was D-Day, and I just kind of kept putting off journaling how I felt about Paddy turning 10 and what we'd been through. And then I got to lunchtime and I was like, right, your window is running out. You need to sit and process this and let all of your feelings come out. And it's interesting because over that whole weekend, I just kept having moments where I thought, oh, I feel like I need to be sick. And I wasn't unwell, but I just every now and then get this pang of needing to vomit. And it wasn't until I sat down to start journaling that my body and mind kind of connected these things together. And so when I started the journaling process, so much of it was actually positive. Like I explained to Fred that I feel like for 10 years we've been climbing this really steep mountain with Paddy, and we're so busy focusing on what's the next step ahead that when we got to this birthday, it finally was that time where I stopped at a point on the mountain and you could look around and see how far you come. And with that comes acknowledging, the hurt, the sadness, the heartbreak, the challenges that we've had to endure to climb to that point in the mountain, but also the most beautiful opportunity to stop and look at how many incredible things are around us. Look at the boy that Paddy has turned into, how grateful he is, how kind he is, how resilient, how much he can persevere. He's an incredible child. And so to stop and think about all of that was just a really beautiful moment too. And to also look at all the growth that's come for us as a family, for me as an individual, the gratitude, the joy, the light, the kindness, the connections we've made with people. So much of that has come through our journey with Paddy. And so all of these things, good and challenging, needed to be journaled out. And it was only that as I was writing that and all the emotions were coming up that I felt, oh my God, I'm going to be sick again. And I actually had to run to the toilet and started dry heaving. And it's like there was nothing there, but the emotions were so strong and so deep within me that that's the way it felt. Like I had to purge them nearly. Like, you've got to get this out because it's now rotting and feeling toxic to have so many emotions in you on such a big journey and not let them out. And so that was I've never had that before. And that's why I think it's important to share how grief can feel, like from the heaviness of it to the physical illness of it to the tears. We often think of crying, I guess, with grief and sadness, but the heaviness you feel in your body and the lethargy. It was a really intense freaking weekend. And so I made sure from then on, actually, for the rest of next few days, usually I'd do like a weights or a workout and stuff. And I thought, no, today you're too heavy and you're going to feel, it's nearly like, I call it like a hangover, I guess, an emotional hangover that lasted the next few days as well. And again, I just chose to treat my body with kindness throughout that process. No judgment, no pushing through. The old me was like, you've got to go for a walk. You've got to get out of this funky mood. It's like, no, actually, maybe I need to just sit in it. And I got that wisdom actually from a good friend, Pam, who was saying, in the past, maybe you've moved too quickly through things and it's okay to just sit and feel the emotions too. And she'd given me that message a few weeks prior, but I needed to hear it. And I really focused on that when I was going through all those feelings for that weekend. So thank you, Pam. Really grateful for your wisdom there. So some takeaways from this episode. One, grief is definitely, I think, one of the hardest emotions to sit with, but you must sit with it. You can keep pushing it down, but it's only going to get harder and bigger to deal with. And I often think of, like jumping the little waves that feels achievable versus pushing things down and then this huge wave just comes and wipes you out. So it's important when you feel the grief coming to let it rise and to release when you can. The other thing I think that's important to say is, can we please normalize feeling the feelings? I'm teaching, kids in a secondary space at the moment, and often what comes up is they want to learn how to regulate their emotions. And so much of the challenge in that is that we as, the generation above them, we never learned how to regulate our emotions. Like I'm 40 and I'm still learning how to process my grief and things. And so I think while I felt bad at the beginning for being upset in front of Audrey and going, taking her to soccer and being upset in the car, in hindsight, what I realized is I was able to show her that sometimes big feelings are going to arrive for us and it's okay to let them out. It's okay to tell people that you're feeling a certain way. And the way she handled that was so beautiful. Like she just held space for me. She wasn't judging me in any way. It didn't derail her day. But hopefully in actually showing her how I was feeling and how I dealt with that and modeling, that I had a bath and I'm going to journal. And then when she has big feelings, hopefully she goes, oh, I've seen this before. It's okay. Mum's been like that. But so often I think as parents, we think we have to be perfect and we can't let our kids see when we're upset and we can't let our kids see when we're stressed. And what we're actually missing is a great opportunity to role model how to process and regulate your feelings. So please don't do that. Just feel the feelings. You don't have to apologize for them. You just need to explain for the people around you what's going on so they can hold space for you and sit beside you during that process. And the final takeaway is use your milestones wherever you can to stop and see how far you've come. So often our world is so busy and we never stop. We just keep rushing from the next thing to the next thing, the next challenge, the next achievement. And we never stop and actually think, wow, look how far we've come. Look how fabulous our children are because of the time and energy we've invested in them, the love that we've given them. And we shouldn't need a big milestone. I mean, that's something if we're practicing gratitude, you can do those on a micro level every day. But I think the big milestones are there for a reason, and that's to really dig deep and stop and reflect on how far you have come as a person and the people around you have come, and celebrate that rather than rushing to the next thing and wishing life away. It's too short. We only get one. Soak it in. Let it marinate. That's all I have for our episode on my grief anniversary experience, but I truly hope that it's given some of you a bit of permission to feel your feelings and a bit of understanding if you're someone who's, struggled with grief. Let's face it, it's one of the most commonly experienced emotions in that at some point every one of us is going to lose someone or something that really mattered to us. So let's stop pushing it down and have a freaking chat about it. Hopefully, that will help more people and will help you if you're listening as well. Please know that I've genuinely missed doing my podcast and that there is season 2 in the wings. I'm going to be collaborating hopefully with a few other people on that one. So watch this space and I'll keep you updated as we get closer to that. But thank you so much again for taking the time to listen. Love you guys. Bye. I hope this episode has given you something to reflect on or some tools that you can implement in your own life. If you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please share it with your family or friends. It would mean so much to me. Remember to stay positive, be grateful, and take each step of the journey with kindness and love in your heart. Until next time, bye.